The noon train out of Abilene was 40 minutes late, and Cecelia Vane spent those 40 minutes reading a deed of title that had her name on it, a name her late husband had borrowed without asking and used without permission, and now left her holding like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples going places she couldn't yet see. She folded the paper along its old creases and put it back inside the front cover of the leather ledger she kept tucked into her traveling bag, between a box of pencils and a folded cotton square her mother had embroidered with the words, "Count everything." She counted everything. It was a habit her father had started and her mother had finished, and 18 months of widowhood had made into something close to religion. The train jerked into motion. Cecelia pressed her shoulder against the window glass and watched the Kansas flatland give way to the broken country of the Colorado Territory, the land going rougher and more honest. The farther west the rails carried her, the sky opening out above the draws and dry washes like a page with too much room on it and not enough written yet. She was 28 years old. She was going to a town called Harlan's Ford to claim a ranch she had never seen, which her dead husband had purchased with money she had earned as a copyist for the Territorial Land Office, which she had only discovered he owned when the probate lawyer in Abilene had slid the deed across his desk and said, "Mrs. Vane, it appears your husband held certain properties," in the tone of a man who had been paid not to say what he actually knew. She had thanked him. She had taken the deed. She had gone home and sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open, and she had written the date and the time, and every word the lawyer had said, and then she had written Harlan's Ford. Find out what Owen bought and who helped him buy it and why. That had been 10 days ago. The train pulled into Harlan's Ford at 20 past 2 in the afternoon, under a sky the color of old bone, and the first thing Cecelia Vane noticed when she stepped off the platform with her bag and her ledger and her 2 trunk boxes was that the man loading freight onto a wagon at the far end of the depot was watching her in the way a man watches something that has arrived ahead of schedule and caused him a problem. She noted the color of his hat, brown, broad-brimmed, a red kerchief at his collar, and the brand burned into the side of the wagon box, a double D, inside a circle, and she wrote both down in the ledger standing right there on the depot platform while the man watched her write and did not look away when she looked up. She looked away first. She had learned that much about men: you did not stare back when you had not yet counted what you were dealing with. She got a room at the Harlan Hotel, which smelled of pine soap and old smoke, and she sat at the room's small writing table, and she spread the deed across the surface, and she looked at the property boundaries described in the surveyor's language at the bottom of the page, and she found what she had suspected since Abilene, the ranch her husband had bought, Vane Creek Ranch, 340 acres, on the high bench above the dry Cimarron, sat at the exact center of something much larger than a cattle operation. The deed description included survey point reference Cimarron Spur 1882, a railroad survey point. Her husband had worked for the Territorial Land Office too briefly in 1881. Long enough. She closed the ledger. She went down to the hotel dining room for supper. She ordered coffee and a plate of beans, and she was halfway through both when she became aware that the conversation in the room had shifted, a particular kind of shift. The kind that happens when a room has been talking about something and the subject of that conversation walks in. The man who walked in was not large exactly, but he used space the way a man does when he has spent years operating in places where space was a commodity. He was perhaps 40, perhaps older, with a face that had been revised by weather and by something harder than weather. He wore a coat the color of alkali dust, and he had a beard gone mostly gray, and his eyes, when he found a seat at the counter and looked up, were the particular flat blue of water under winter ice. He ordered coffee. He did not look at her. She looked at him. Something had happened to his left hand. The last 2 fingers were missing, healed clean. An old wound, the hand resting on the counter as naturally as if it had always been that way. She went back to her beans. She opened the ledger to a clean page and wrote, "Hotel Dining Room, Tuesday, March 4th, 1884. Man at counter, coat color alkali. Left hand 2 fingers short, calm, accustomed to being watched, does not perform for rooms. Note him." The next morning she went to the county records office in the basement of the courthouse on Fletcher Street, which was run by a clerk named Aldous Price, who had the look of a man who had been filing papers so long he had begun to resemble one thin flat easily slid out of sight. Price was helpful in the way of a man who was helpful to everyone, which was to say he was not actually helpful at all. He found her the deed registry, the tax rolls, the water rights filings on the dry Cimarron bench. He found her everything she asked for and nothing she needed, because what she needed was not in any file he had been paid to show her. What she noticed was what was missing. The 1882 survey records for the Cimarron Spur were referenced in 6 different documents on file in that office. The actual survey itself, the maps, the gradient calculations, the right-of-way proposals, was not in any drawer she was shown, though the drawer labeled 1882 Federal Surveys had the unmistakable look of a drawer that had recently held more than it currently held. She thanked Price. She smiled at Price. She let Price hold the door for her and call her ma'am and feel like a gentleman. And while he was holding the door, she counted the frames on the wall behind his desk. 7 frames for 7 different years of service recognition. And she noted that the oldest was from 1877 and the newest was from 1882. And there was no frame for 1883 and no frame for 1884. She wrote Price Aldous, records clerk, 1882 survey maps removed. No recognition past 1882. Ask who he answers to now. She was back in the street when the man from the hotel counter fell into step beside her. She did not startle. She had heard him come. "Ma'am," he said without preamble. "Mister," she said and waited. "Callum Rede." He said it the way a man gives a name in a place where names carry weight, and he has learned to let the weight land before he speaks again. She let it land. She did not recognize it. She wrote it in the ledger as she walked, which she could do without looking down a skill she had developed in 4 years of taking dictation for territorial judges, who did not slow down for hands that weren't fast. "Should I know you, Mr. Rede?" she said. "No, ma'am, but I reckon I know enough about why you're in Harlan's Ford that I'd rather speak to you before somebody else does." She stopped walking. She turned to face him on the boardwalk outside the saddler's shop, and the smell of new leather came through the open door behind her, and she looked at him in full daylight for the first time. The eyes were older than the face. That was the thing. Whatever he had seen, he had been seeing it a long time. "Then speak," she said. "I don't have a habit of waiting." He almost smiled. It didn't reach the winter ice eyes, but it moved the corner of his mouth. "Your husband bought Vane Creek Ranch in October of 1883, he said. "He bought it from a man named Driscoll Payne, who had inherited the property from his father and needed cash money fast for reasons I can tell you if you want them or leave out if you don't. I want them." Payne's father had a debt with Amos Colcord. The name did something to the street. Not much. A woman passing them slowed by a half step and kept walking. A man on the far side of the road did not look up from hitching his horse, but his hand stopped moving for 1 second and then started again. "Colcord," she said. "Amos Colcord owns the Double D brand," Rede said. "Runs cattle, owns the bank, owns the mill, holds paper on a significant portion of this county, and has been quietly acquiring deeds along the Dry Cimarron Bench since 1881. Since the survey." He was quiet a moment. "Yes, ma'am. Since the survey." She looked at him. "Who are you, Mr. Rede?" "Not your name. Who are you?" He took a moment. He seemed to be deciding something, or deciding how much of something to say. "I was a deputy U.S. Marshal until the winter of 1882, he said. "I am currently not a deputy U.S. Marshal in the way that a man who has been forced to resign his badge is no longer a marshal. I came to Harlan's Ford to find out what happened to a missing federal survey. I have been here 6 weeks. I have not yet found what I came to find." She opened the ledger. She wrote while he stood waiting, not impatiently, the way a man waits who understands that the waiting has purpose. "What do you know about the survey?" she said. "What do you know about the deed your husband left you?" he said. She looked up. "Fair question." She told him. She told him about the deed, about the 1882 survey reference in the property description, about the missing file drawer in Price's office. She told him about the freight wagon at the depot yesterday and the man with the red kerchief who had watched her step off the train. She showed him the ledger entry. He read it. He read it carefully as a man reads something he has been half looking for. "The red kerchief," he said. "You know him. His name is Fossey. He rides for Colcord." She closed the ledger. "Mr. Rede," she said, "I am going to ride out to Vane Creek Ranch tomorrow morning to inspect a property I own. I will be going alone. I am not inviting company, and I am not asking for an escort." He nodded. "I understand that. But if a man who knows this county happened to be riding in the same general direction for his own reasons, and happened to know which draws go to water and which go to nothing," she said, "I would not call that an imposition." He looked at her for a moment. A long moment. "I reckon I might have reasons to ride the Cimarron Bench tomorrow," he said. I reckoned you might, she said. Sun up. She walked on. She did not look back. She had already written his name in the ledger, and she already knew she would not have to write it again from a second introduction. The ranch house at Vane Creek was a two-room cabin of cottonwood logs with a dirt floor and a stove that had rusted through at one corner, and a view from the east window that made the inadequacy of everything else inside the room beside the point. The bench dropped away to the south in long, rolling terraces of brown grass and gray sage, and at the bottom where the dry Cimarron ran shallow and cold between its cut banks, you could see the narrow shadow of the water from half a mile up. And beyond that, the country opened out toward territory that was still technically the edge of what had been mapped. A railroad going through here, said Rede from the door of the east window, would be the straightest grade and the cheapest construction between the Kansas line and Santa Fe. I know it, she said. She was on her knees at the corner of the south wall, pressing on boards, checking for gaps. She had read the deed description 4 more times on the ride out, and she knew where the property lines fell, and she had already found what she was looking for. A post driven in the wrong place, a survey stake that did not match the legal description, a corner marker reset in ground that had been recently disturbed. Mr. Rede. He turned. Come look at this. He crouched beside her. He looked at the misplaced stake and then at the corner of the room and then at her. Somebody resurveyed this property, she said. After the sale, this corner stake is 6 feet inside the original line. He looked at her. 6 feet is nothing in 340 acres. By itself, she said. She stood and pulled out the folded deed in the ledger, and she had already drawn the property map from the legal description in a spare page at the back, and she showed him. If you pull every property line 6 feet to the west on the bench properties, the right-of-way corridor for the Cimarron Spur moves 6 feet east, enough to bring it off the bench entirely and put it through the Colcord holdings on the river flat instead. Colcord sells his river flat at railroad right-of-way prices. The bench landowners, including the previous owners of every parcel Colcord has quietly collected, lose the premium entirely. He was still looking at the map. Your husband knew about the survey, he said. My husband worked for the land office. He copied surveyor's notes for 6 months before he was dismissed. He would have seen the original corridor route. He bought this ranch because it sat in the path of the original route, not the manipulated one. She folded the map. She looked at the stake in the ground. He was not a good man, she said, not bitterly, not kindly, just as fact, the way a woman states a thing she has had time to fully understand. But he was a greedy man, and a greedy man sometimes stumbles into the truth by following the money to where it leads. Reed stood. He was close. The east window light came in at an angle that caught the gray in his beard and the flatness in his eyes, and she could see that the eyes were not actually flat. They were careful, which was a different thing. The flatness was the surface over something that was doing a great deal of work underneath. Ma'am, he said quietly, Colcord knows you're here. I know he does. He's going to move fast. A widow without connections holding a deed on a parcel in the way of a railroad deal that's been 4 years in the building. He'll want that deed cleared before a federal surveyor can be called in. I know that too. She put the ledger away. She looked at the misplaced stake one more time. Tell me what you know about the original 1882 survey, she said. Everything you know, he told her. He told her standing in the empty cabin with the wind coming through the gap in the south wall and the smell of sage and cold creek water coming with it. He had been assigned to escort the federal survey team in the fall of 1882, 4 men out of Denver carrying instruments and maps and a formal mandate from the Interior Department to assess the Cimarron Spur right of way. They had completed the survey. They had filed a preliminary report. That report had named the high bench route as the preferred corridor, cheaper grade, lower construction cost, better drainage. 3 weeks after the report was filed, the lead surveyor had been transferred without explanation to a posting in Oregon. The 2 assistants had resigned. The 4th man, a chain carrier named Burl Cassette, had disappeared entirely, and his name did not appear on any subsequent Interior Department roster. The report had been revised. The revised report recommended the River Flat route. The revised report had Price's office stamp on it, dated January of 1883. You were the escort, she said. Yes, ma'am. And when they transferred the lead surveyor, I made a report. I sent it to the regional office in Denver. She closed her eyes briefly. I was notified my report had been reviewed and found to contain insufficient basis for further inquiry, and I was informed that my conduct in the matter had demonstrated she could hear him choosing the next words, with the care of a man who had read them many times a willful misapprehension of proper administrative procedure. They forced you to resign. I resigned before they could take the badge by other means. She opened the ledger. She wrote for a long moment. He waited. Mr. Rede, she said. Ma'am, I am going to need you to ride to Denver. He was quiet. Not now, she said. Not yet. First, I need two things that only I can get. Then you ride. What two things? Burl Cassette's original survey notes, and the name of the man in Colcord's operation who redrove this stake. He looked at the stake. Those two things might take longer than we have. Then we had better start tonight, she said. She walked to the door of the cabin and stopped in it, the afternoon light coming at her from the west, lighting up the hollow of her cheek and the set of her jaw. She had, he thought, the look of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for long enough that she had stopped noticing the weight. It was not a look that invited sympathy. It was a look that invited serious attention. She turned back. One more thing, she said. Ma'am, you told me you came to Harlan's Ford to find the missing survey. That's 6 weeks of your life on a cold trail with no badge and no authority. What's the real reason? He looked at her. He did not answer right away. Burl Cassette, he said finally. The chain carrier who disappeared. His real name was Burton Reed. She said nothing. My brother, he said. She turned back to the doorway. She looked out at the bench in the silver thread of the dry Cimarron far below in the wide country opening south. Then we have the same reason, she said, and walked out into the afternoon. They rode back to town in a silence that was not uncomfortable. Cecelia rode in the ledger on horseback, which was not elegant, but was accurate. And Callum Rede watched her write with the expression of a man watching something he has not seen before and is trying to classify. She was not what he had expected when he had seen her step off the train yesterday. He had expected a widow in mourning clothes, uncertain, newly arrived in a place she didn't know, possibly in the early stages of understanding that she had been used. Instead, she had stepped off the platform with a ledger under her arm and a bag in her hand, in the posture of a woman who had already finished being uncertain about the situation and was now simply gathering information. He had been a lawman long enough to recognize when a person was building a case. He had not expected to find one being built by a woman with a pencil on a hotel platform, but he was too old and had seen too much strange country to be stopped by the unexpected. In town, she went directly to the hotel. He went directly to the livery. They did not say goodbye. They had not agreed to meet. He assumed she would find him when she had something to find him with, and he was right. She came to the livery at 2 hours past dark, moving quietly along the alley behind the hotel, her dark coat making her nearly invisible between buildings. He was awake. He had been awake. She showed him the ledger page. She had been in the hotel dining room for supper, and while she was in the dining room, a man named Fosse had come in and sat near the window. And while Fosse was near the window, a second man had come in, and the two of them had spoken for perhaps 4 minutes, and the second man had given Fosse a folded paper and had left. She had not heard the words, but she had seen the paper clearly enough to describe the handwriting on the outside tall letters left, slanting the double D brand mark drawn in the corner. Colcord, he said. I believe so. And I believe that paper is a schedule. Of what? She was quiet a moment. Of what they plan to do about me, she said without heat, without drama, the same way she might have said of what we'll need at the hardware store. And I believe they plan to do it before the week is out. He looked at her. How confident are you? She opened the ledger to a page. The top of the page said Owen Vane pattern of behavior. Below it were 19 notations in small, careful handwriting. My husband, she said, sold a parcel of property in Abilene in the fall of 1881, using a forged power of attorney in my name. I discovered this in 1882, and I confronted him, and he denied it, and produced what appeared to be a legitimate document. I could not prove the forgery at the time, but I kept the record. When he died 8 months ago, I pulled every document in his files, and I found the original Abilene deed, and I compared the handwriting on the power of attorney to the handwriting on 6 letters he had written me in the first year of our marriage, and they matched in every character except the signature, which was a different hand entirely. She turned the page. Someone wrote that signature for him. Someone who could forge a woman's handwriting well enough to pass a county clerk. That someone did the same thing for Driscoll Payne in 1882, when Payne needed to liquidate the Carter she stopped. When Payne needed to liquidate the bench property fast. And that same hand is on the paper that Colcord sent to Fosse tonight. How do you know? Because I watched Fosse open it while I was paying my supper bill, and the fold of the paper faced me, and I saw the bottom edge of the writing, and the letter slope is the same. He looked at her for a long moment. You need reading glasses for that kind of distance, he said. She reached into her coat pocket and held up a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles. He almost smiled again. This time it reached somewhere close to the eyes. What do you need from me tonight, he said. She told him. She needed him to go to the rooming house on 2nd Street where the men who worked the Double D operation bedded down when they were in town. She needed him to find out which of those men was not a cowhand and not a gun hand, but a clerk. Soft hands, good boots, a room to himself if the landlady allowed it. The forger, if I'm right. He put on his coat. He went. He was back in 2 hours. He stood in the alley below the livery loft, and she stood at the loft door above, and he spoke quietly. Man named Wither, he said. Barnaby Wither. He is a clerk by trade. He has his own room, south-facing 2nd floor. He arrived in Harlan's Ford in October of 1882. 1 month before Owen bought the ranch, she said. Yes, ma'am. And Wither, he said, was the chain carrier on the 1882 Federal Survey team. She went still. Not Burl Cassette. Burl Cassette was a name he was using. She looked at him. He looked at her. The loft above the alley, below the smell of hay and horse and dry winter air, between them and something else. The sensation of a case turning the way. Water turns when it has found the downhill slope, and now will not be stopped by anything short of stone. Mr. Rede, she said. Ma'am, your brother is alive. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. If Wither changed his name and is still in Colcord's employ, she said carefully, then the question is whether he changed his name willingly or was compelled to change it. And if compelled, she stopped. He's being held, Red said. Not with chains, with the survey notes. They have the original survey notes, the genuine ones, and if those notes surface in a federal proceeding, Wither either testifies against Colcord or hangs for participating in the fraud. Colcord has him in a box. She came down the loft ladder. She stood on the ground floor of the livery with him, and she opened the ledger and she wrote, We need to get to Wither before Colcord acts on whatever was in that paper tonight, she said. We need the original notes, and we need Wither's testimony. In that order. He is going to be afraid, Rita said. I know he may not talk to me. He's more likely to talk to a woman, she said. People often are. And she looked up from the ledger. I am going to tell him I found the misplaced survey stake. I am going to tell him I have an exact measured record of the deviation. I am going to tell him that I don't need his notes to prove the fraud. I need them to prove the scale of it. And I am going to tell him that a federal marshal can be in Harlan's Ford in 4 days if someone sends for him tonight, and that the only people in this county who will not go to prison in the month that follows are the people who are standing on the right side of the evidence when the marshal arrives. She closed the ledger. Will that work, he said. She looked at him. It depends on how afraid he is, she said, and how much of his own name he still wants back. He took his coat off the nail where he had hung it when he returned. He put it back on. When he said, Now, she said, before Fosse uses whatever's in that paper. They went. The rooming house on 2nd Street was dark except for one window on the 2nd floor, south-facing, where a lamp burned low and steady. They did not go in through the front. Cecelia had stopped at the hardware store that afternoon. She had made a point of stopping at the hardware store, had in fact made a point of making a visible tour of Main Street businesses while she was being watched spending unhurried money, behaving like a woman settling in, and among the things she had purchased was a diagram of the building plots along 2nd Street, which the hardware man had sold her on the grounds that she was a property owner looking to understand the town's infrastructure, which was true enough. The back entry of the rooming house was a washroom door, unlocked. The staircase inside was narrow and creaked on the 2nd step and the 4th and the 8th. She went up the outside counting. Rede came up the inside. She knocked at the south room door. 3 knocks, even measured. The lamp shadow moved under the door. Nothing for 10 seconds. Then who's there? She said, My name is Cecelia Vane. My husband owned Vane Creek Ranch. I found the stake you moved. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because I think you want out. Longer silence. 17 seconds. The lock turned. Barnaby Wither was 34 years old and he looked 60. He had the face of a man who had been holding something toxic for a long time, a careful, pared-down face, the face of a man who has stopped allowing himself expressions because expressions might reveal things. He wore a nightshirt and held a lamp and looked at them in the doorway like a man who has practiced for this moment and found the practice has done him no good at all. She came in. Rede came in behind her. She sat down at the room's single chair, opened the ledger, and she told him what she knew. She did not soften it, and she did not rush it. She told him about the stake. She told him about the letter slope on the Abilene forgery and the paper Fosse had received tonight. She told him about Callum Rede, who was standing by the door, and Callum Rede said, "I know who you are, Burl. I have been looking for you for 16 months. Wither Cassette sat on the edge of the bed. He put his hands on his knees. His hands were shaking, and he did not try to hide it. "They're going to move this week," Rede said. "Not on me," Wither said low. "Not this week." "On Vane Creek," Cecelia said. "On me. And when Vane Creek is clear, the survey dispute is closed. The right-of-way amendment is permanent, and everyone who knows what really happened in 1882 is either dead or too afraid to speak." Wither looked at his hands. "The notes," he said, "they burned the notes." Cecelia did not move. She had written that down before he said it. She had known it was the most likely outcome. She had planned past it. "Tell me about the burning," she said. He told her. The original survey notes had been burned in the Denver office in January of 1883. Wither had been in the room. He had been made to witness the burning so that he could be held responsible for it, which was the elegance of Colcord's arrangement. Wither had certified the destruction of federal survey documents, which made him an accessory to the fraud, which meant any testimony he gave was tainted, which meant Colcord owned him. "What did you copy?" she said. He looked up. She looked back at him steadily. "A man does not make neat notes in a second-floor room in a town where he is hiding under a false name and keep nothing of the original work. A man like that makes copies. He copies in case he needs to run. He copies in case he needs proof of his own innocence. He copies because his hands remember how." Wither reached under the mattress. She felt Rede move behind her, not alarm, just attention. He went still again. Wither pulled out a folded oilskin packet. He turned it over in his hands. "They're not the originals," he said. "They're my working notes from the field. Pencil marks, not official. They'd be attacked as unreliable. Not in combination with a measured survey deviation from the site itself," she said. She opened the ledger to the map she had drawn that morning, the cabin, the bench, the misplaced stake, the 6-foot deviation from the legal property line, each measurement set down in her small, careful notation with the date and the time. A measured field discrepancy in an existing deed corroborated by independent survey notes from the original 1882 team is not unreliable. It is a second source. She held out her hand. He put the oilskin in it. She did not exhale. She did not close her eyes. She did not show him what that packet meant to her. She opened it. She looked at the first page. She looked at Wither. "There is a telegram office in this town," she said. "Post office," he said. "Closes at 7. Then we have 2 hours," she said. She stood. "Mr. Rede." She did not look at him. She was already writing. "You said 4 days for a marshal from Denver. 3 if he rides the night through. I know a man. Then you need to send the wire tonight." He moved for the door. "Mr. Rede." He stopped. She still did not look up from the ledger. "Take Wither with you." She looked up then at Wither. "Go with him. Tonight. Right now. Don't come back to this room." "Where are we going?" Wither looked afraid, and something else, the specific expression of a man who can feel the box opening. "To send a wire," she said, "and then to the livery, and then out of this town on the North Trail until Mr. Rede is satisfied that you're clear of Colcord's reach." She turned the page and kept writing. "I will stay and keep Colcord's attention on me until the marshal arrives." Rede stopped in the doorway. "That is not—" "I know it isn't," she said. "But I am the property owner. I am the one Colcord needs to act on before the week is out. As long as Colcord thinks I am here waiting with no more than a dead husband's deed and a ledger, he has no reason to move before he's ready. And I need 3 more days." She looked at Rede. "3 days, Mr. Rede." He looked at her for a long moment. The lamp threw long shadows, and the February air came thin and cold through the window gap, and somewhere outside on 2nd Street, a horse shifted its weight and the sound was as quiet as a question. He went to the bed. He picked up the oilskin packet, and he put it inside his coat. "I will leave you the notes." She shook her head. "Take them. The ledger is enough." He looked at the ledger. "I have been copying field measurements and legal descriptions for 4 years," she said. "I do not lose accuracy." "Go." He looked at her one more second. "Then Wither, come on." Wither came. At the door he stopped. "Mrs. Vane." She looked up. "The man Fosse," he said. "The one with the red kerchief. He does not ride for Colcord." She waited. "He rides for Colcord's attorney, a man named Leland Cray. Cray is the one who forged the documents. Cray is the one who redrove the stake. Cray is the one who has been handling the county clerk in Denver. And Cray," he said, and he looked very careful now, the way a man looks when he is finally going to say a thing out loud that he has been swallowing for a year. "Cray is the one who gave me my instructions the night the notes were burned." She wrote it. "Barnaby," she said. "Go." They went. She sat in the empty room for 10 minutes after the sound of their boots on the back stair had faded. She wrote in the ledger. She copied out every notation from Wither's working notes that she had gotten a clear look at before Rede took the packet she had been reading as she asked her questions the way her mother had taught her to watch two things at once, and she had gotten a great deal of it. Not all of it. Enough. Then she folded the ledger into her coat. She walked back through the dark washroom to the alley. She walked the alley south to the hardware store block and then west to the hotel. She went up the back stairs, unlocked her room, and she was already sitting at the writing table with a second lamp lit and the ledger open when she heard down at the far end of the hall the sound of a door that was not her door being tried quietly and finding itself locked. She wrote Wednesday, March 5th, 1884. 11:40 p.m. Someone tried 302. My room is 308. They do not know which room yet. Clock started. She did not sleep. She kept the lamp at minimum, and she sat at the table and she worked. And what she worked on was the legal brief she had been writing in sections across 7 pages of the ledger since Abilene. A precise sourced, dated account of every element of the Colcord fraud, as she understood it written in the language of the Territorial Land Office, because she had spent 4 years in that office, and she knew exactly what a federal surveyor needed to see when he arrived and needed to understand a situation before he was pressed to act on it. She wrote until 3 in the morning. Then she made herself lie down on top of the covers with her coat on and her boots on, and she was asleep in 4 minutes. The next day passed quietly, too quietly, which she noted in the ledger, in which she understood as the quiet of a man deciding. She ate breakfast in the dining room. She went to the post office and asked in plain hearing of 2 other patrons whether there were any wire services available in town for out-of-territory correspondence. She walked past Price's office and nodded to Price through the window. She bought pencils at the hardware store and a pair of wool gloves and a tin of lamp oil, all of which she needed. She did not go near the livery. She did not ask about Rede. She did not ask about anyone. She was in her room at 4:15 in the afternoon, reading the deed for the 11th time when the door of room 302 opened down the hall and Fosse came out. She heard his boots. She knew his walk by now. She had noted it the first day, the slight drag of the right heel that left a distinctive mark on soft ground. She heard him go down the front stairs. She heard him go out the hotel's front door. She went to her own window. She watched Fosse cross Fletcher Street at a diagonal moving toward the brick building on the corner that housed the office of one Leland Cray, attorney at law. She picked up the ledger. She put on her coat. She went out. She did not go toward Cray's office. She went to the north end of Main Street to the dry goods store that she had visited on her first morning in town, where the proprietor's wife, a small, direct woman named Harlan, the kind of woman who notices everything and says very little, had rung up her purchases with the particular attentiveness of a woman who was assessing a stranger and had not yet made her determination. Cecelia bought coffee and salt pork and flour. She said conversationally, "Is the Harkin family from this county originally, or did you come in with the railroad surveyors in 1882? Harkin's wife looked at her. "We came in with the first cattle season," she said. 81. "So you knew the valley before the survey," Cecelia said. "We knew every family on the bench before the survey. Most of them gone now. Not all of them gone willingly." Cecelia opened the ledger. Not to write. She turned it to the property map she had drawn of the bench, the misplaced stake, the deviation. She laid it on the counter. Harkin's wife looked at it for a long moment without speaking. I'm going to need to send 3 letters tonight, Cecelia said, to 3 families who left the bench between 1882 and 1884. I need names and forwarding addresses if you have them. What I'm going to send them is evidence that their departure was not a matter of bad luck or bad cattle or bad water. Harkin's wife looked up. What is it a matter of? She said. Cecelia told her. She sent 6 letters that night, 3 to former bench landowners, 1 to the county surveyor's office in Denver, not wired mailed because a wire could be intercepted, but mailed so that a date stamp would exist, 1 to the federal land office in Washington City, 1 to a woman in Abilene who was a court copyist and had been Cecilia's closest colleague for 4 years, and who she trusted with one specific task: to retrieve from the Abilene County records the original deed for the property that had been sold using the forged power of attorney in 1881, and to make a certified true copy of it and to hold that copy until contacted. She sealed the letters. She walked to the post office at 7:55, 5 minutes before closing, and she mailed them with a calm that was not performed, but was instead the specific calm of a woman who has completed the preparation she can complete and is now waiting for what comes. The second day passed. She read, she wrote, she ate her meals in the dining room, and she spoke to no one about anything that mattered. And at supper on the second day, she saw across the dining room a man she had not seen before. He was an older man, well-dressed for the territory, with the particular bearing of a man who is accustomed to sitting at the head of tables. He wore a dark coat and a gold watch chain, and he sat with 2 other men whom she recognized as local business owners, and he ate his supper with the unhurried confidence of a man who is not afraid of anything in the room around him. She did not know his face, but she knew the double D hat band on the hat he had set on the table beside his plate. She wrote Amos Colcord, first sighting, Thursday evening hotel dining room, came himself, either confident or anxious. Both looked the same from this distance. He did not look at me. He did look at her, once when she was paying her bill. A look of the precise duration a careful man allows himself when he does not want to appear to be looking 4 seconds. She counted. She went to her room. She sat at the writing table and she read back through the legal brief she had been building. She made 2 corrections. She added 3 dates she had confirmed in Price's record office on the first day. She added the notation about Wither Cassette's name change and the date of his arrival in Harlan's Ford. She was nearly done. The knock at her door came at 11 that night. 3 knocks, even, measured. The mirror of her own knock. She recognized it. She opened the door. Callum Rede stood in the hall. He had road dust on his coat, in his face and his boots, and a look in the winter ice eyes that was not the same look that had been there 3 days ago. Something had changed, not warmed exactly, but shifted. Wither is clear, he said. He is in a rooming house in Pueblo under his own name with a deputy I trust inside the same building. He will speak when spoken to. She stepped back. He came in, and the wire, she said. He reached into his coat. He held out a folded paper. She took it. She opened it. She read, received your material. Stop Federal Marshal L. Duvane assigned. Stop depart, Denver, Thursday, dawn stop. Arrive Harlan Ford. Saturday between 8 and midnight. Stop Rita, you damn well better be right about this one. Stop Hartwell. She read it twice. Then she folded it and set it on the table beside the ledger. Tomorrow night, she said. He was looking at the ledger, at the pages covered in her small, careful hand, the pages she had not let him see when he left. He is bringing 6 deputies, she said. I know, I sent him enough. Not just the notes, he confirmed. Hartwell is the kind of man who reads everything and then acts. By the time he gets here, he will have read what I sent him, and I believe he will be prepared to act on it immediately. She was quiet a moment. Colcord is in town. I know, I saw him when I came in. Does he know the marshal is coming? Rada looked at her. No. She nodded. Then tomorrow night is going to come down to timing, she said. He looked at the ledger again. What is in there that you didn't send with me? She opened it. She turned it to face him. He sat down on the edge of the table, not taking a chair, the way a man sits who does not intend to stay long. And he read. He read for 14 minutes. She counted. When he looked up, his expression was the expression of a man who has found the piece that explains the puzzle he has been looking at for 16 months. Leland Cray, he said. Colcord gave the order. Cray did the work. He did the work from the beginning, the survey manipulation, the forged deeds, the transfers. Every document that made this legal was Cray's signature. She nodded. He's the one who has to testify, Rede said. Or be proven against, she said, without his testimony. Which do you prefer? She considered it. Testimony, she said. He's the kind of man who will negotiate. He will want to negotiate. If Duvane arrests Colcord first in a public place with witnesses before Cray knows the marshal is in town, Cray will come to the table. He has no other move. He is going to know something is wrong tonight, Rede said. Colcord has been waiting for 3 days. He expected to move on you by now, and he hasn't moved, and he's going to wonder why. I've been wondering about that myself. She reached into the ledger and withdrew a folded page. Not a page she had written, a page she had been given. She slid it across the table toward him. He looked at it. Where did you get this? From Harkin's wife at the dry goods store. She found it in her husband's account book from 1881 between 2 regular pages. She said she has always known it was there, and she has always known it was something she was not meant to have, and she has been keeping it because she has kept a great many things in this county because you never know when something will turn out to matter. It was a note in the now familiar left slanting hand. It was addressed to H, and it described a payment schedule for a certain favor rendered, and it was signed with the initials L.C. Cray's handwriting, she said, in Harkin's private accounts in 1881, before the survey. Paying Harkin to report on which bench landowners were having financial difficulty. Rede read it. Mrs. Vane, he said. She waited. You have built an extremely thorough case. She looked at him. A case is only as thorough as its evidence is clean, she said. Everything I have is documented. Everything is dated. Everything has a second source. That is not thoroughness. That is just not being careless. He looked at her for a moment with the winter ice eyes that were doing all their work underneath the surface. No, he said. That is thorough. She almost said something. She stopped herself. There was a quality to the moment, the lamplight, the dust on his coat, the ledger open between them. That was not unlike the quality of standing at the east window of the Vane Creek cabin, with the bench dropping away below, and the dry Cimarron shining in the distance, the sensation of something very large and very precise having come together correctly. She was not accustomed to allowing herself that sensation. She had learned early that the thing about careful work was that there was always another thing to document. She closed the ledger. Tomorrow, she said, whatever Colcord's schedule is, we need the marshal to arrive first, before Colcord makes his move. If Duvane rides through, he might make it by dusk, if he camps. If he camps, she said, we send someone north to meet him on the trail and tell him not to. She looked up. Rede looked at her. I know someone who can ride north tonight, he said. So do I. She stood. Get some sleep, Mr. Rede. He didn't move for a moment. Then he stood. At the door, he stopped. He had a hand on the frame, the 3-fingered left hand the old wound healed. Mrs. Vane. She looked at him. When this is settled, he said, what do you want for Vane Creek? She thought about it. Not long. To keep it, she said, fix the stove, run cattle on the bench, find out whether the spring on the east side can be brought to a proper line. And the right-of-way, he said. If the Cimarron spur runs through the original route, the railroad will want to negotiate. I'll negotiate, she said. I've done it before. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has been revising his understanding of something progressively upward for several days and has not quite reached the ceiling of that revision. You'd stay here, he said. I own the land, she said. I intend to know it. He looked at the floor once, then back at her. I did not originally intend to stay in Harlan's Ford past the winter, he said. She looked at him, but he said and stopped. She waited. She realized very good at waiting. She had had a great deal of practice, but I reckon a man could find reasons, he said, to consider it. She said nothing for a moment. Then Mr. Rede, a man who is considering reasons, tends to leave them as reasons. I would suggest you go sleep and then do what needs doing tomorrow, and after that, if you are still considering, you might tell me plainly. He looked at her. Then he put his hat on. Yes, ma'am, he said. He went. She stood at the window. She looked at the dark street below the lamplight from the saloon 1 block down. The cold stars above the roofline, the sky vast and permanent, above the small and temporary business of human ambition and human error and human occasionally courage. She opened the ledger. She wrote Thursday, March 6th, 1884 midnight. Case complete pending Marshal's arrival. Evidence clean. Sources documented. Rede returned. Wither secured in Pueblo. Letters sent. Notes held. She paused. Callum Rede told me he is considering staying in Harlan's Ford. I told him to say so plainly when the time came. I believe he will. Another pause shorter. I will write it when it is certain. I do not write things I am not certain of. She closed the ledger. She put out the lamp. She lay down in the dark, still in her coat, still in her boots, and she thought about a two-room cabin on a high bench above the dry Cimarron, and a stove that needed fixing, and a spring on the east side, and what it would feel like to open the east window in the morning and hear nothing but wind and cattle, in the particular dry country silence that was not empty, but what she suspected a kind of fullness she had never had the space to find. Saturday came in cold and clear, a sky the color of good steel, the kind of morning that sits very still and then does everything at once. Cecelia was at the writing table by 5:30. She did not open the ledger. She had everything she needed in the ledger, and she did not need to add to it until there was something new to add. At 8 o'clock, Rade came to her door. He was clean-shaven, she noticed. He had taken the road dust off his coat. Harkin's wife rode north last night, he said. 3 hours ahead of us. Cecelia nodded. And Colcord, still at the hotel. His men were at the saloon until 2. Fosse is at the livery. Colcord's waiting for dark, she said. Yes. The Marshal arrives between 8 and midnight, she said. If he rode hard 8. If he slept midnight. We need him before midnight. We need him before dark. He looked at her. If the Marshal arrives at dusk, she said, and arrests Colcord in the hotel dining room before supper with the warrant, with the deputies with Cray named and the fraud documented. Then Colcord has no window. He cannot send to Fosse. He cannot send to anyone. That depends on Devane moving fast. I sent him a very clear brief, she said. A man who has been given a very clear brief generally moves fast, or he would not have the job. She put on her coat. She picked up the ledger. She put on the wire-rimmed spectacles. Rede looked at her. You look like a schoolteacher going to court, he said. She looked back at him. Good, she said. That is exactly what I am. Marshal Luther Devane rode into Harlan's Ford at 5:20 in the afternoon with 6 deputies at his back and the expression of a man who had read a very good brief and was ready to act on it. He was 60, compact, with a white mustache, and the kind of permanent authority that required no announcement. He found Cecelia Vane at the hotel with a ledger in her hand, and he shook her hand the way you shake the hand of a person who has done most of your work for you, which is differently from any other handshake. He read the brief in 15 minutes. He read the ledger in 25. He asked 3 questions. 2 of them she had already answered in the brief, and 1 of them she answered from memory with a date and a document reference, and he wrote both down and did not ask her to repeat herself. At 6:30, Marshal Devane walked into the hotel dining room where Amos Colcord was sitting down to supper with 2 of his men and Leland Cray, and he laid the warrant on the white cloth between the soup and the bread, and he said, Mr. Colcord, Mr. Cray, gentlemen on your feet. Colcord looked at the warrant. He looked at the badge. He looked at 6 deputies in the doorway. He looked at Cecelia Vane standing at the back of the room with a ledger under her arm and wire-rimmed spectacles and the steady, patient expression of a woman who has not slept more than 4 hours in 4 days and does not intend to sleep for several hours more. You, Colcord said. She said nothing. Cray's chair scraped back. One of the deputies had him before the chair had finished moving. Colcord did not try. He was too smart for that. He was the kind of man who understood when the room had changed and who changed with it, which was exactly the kind of man who hired other men to do the things he did not want to be associated with, and who now sat with his hands on the white cloth and said nothing because there was nothing to say that was better than silence. She walked to the table. She stood across from him. Mr. Colcord, she said. He looked at her. He had, she thought, the eyes of a man who had spent 40 years mistaking patience for weakness and was only now understanding the distinction. In the spring of 1882, she said, you purchased the cooperation of a federal survey team, manipulated the route documentation of the Cimarron Spur right-of-way, acquired 47 parcels of bench property, through forged debt instruments and coerced sales, and arranged for the legal and financial destruction of 11 families in this county who own the land you intended to profit from. You have been doing this for 4 years. The evidence is documented. The evidence is dated. The evidence has second sources. She opened the ledger. She did not read from it. She turned it to face him. This is not the original, she said. The original is in Denver with Marshal Duvane's office. What you are looking at is a copy. I write everything twice. My mother taught me that. Colcord looked at the ledger. He looked at her. He looked at the man he had employed for 4 years to make the undoable look legal, who was now in handcuffs. He looked at the white cloth under his hands. He said nothing. She closed the ledger. Marshal, she said. She did not wait for Colcord to speak. She did not need him to speak. She turned and walked back toward the door, and Callum Rede was in the doorway, and she walked past him into the evening street, and the cold air hit her like a verdict delivered in a quiet room. Shem. The trial was held in Denver in the federal court building on Larimer Street, and it ran from June through August of 1884, and on the 11th day, Cecelia Vane took the stand and was asked by the defense attorney whether she could verify the accuracy of the ledger entries she had presented as primary documentation. She opened the ledger on her lap. She said, I began keeping this ledger on the day I was hired as a copyist for the Territorial Land Office in 1880. I have written in it every working day since then, and many days that were not working days. Everything in it is written within 12 hours of the event it describes. Every entry is dated and timed. When I copied material from another source, I wrote the source beside the copy. I have never written in this ledger anything I was not in a position to verify at the time of writing. She looked up. I have 22 other ledgers at home, she said, if the court requires the context. The defense attorney did not ask for the other ledgers. On the 23rd day, Barnaby Wither, who had chosen to use his own name, took the stand and was in the witness chair for 6 hours and did not flinch once. The defense attorney tried 3 times to shake him on specific dates. Each time, Wither said the date, the time, the weather, the room he had been standing in, and the name of every person present, and then he waited for the next question. On the 31st day, Leland Cray entered a guilty plea on 12 counts of forgery, fraud, and conspiracy in exchange for testimony against Colcord on 4 additional counts. The judge accepted the plea. Cray's attorney tried to negotiate the sentence. The judge was an elderly woman appointed to the federal bench in 1877 whose name was Honorata Swan, and she had the look of a person who had heard a great deal of negotiation in her time and had formed a settled view on it. She said to Cray's attorney, your client is going to tell the court everything he knows. After that, I will decide what your client's cooperation is worth, not before. Cray told the court everything he knew. It took 4 days. At the end of it, Judge Swan sentenced Amos Colcord to 22 years at the federal prison in Leavenworth and noted in her written decision that the scale of the fraud and the number of families displaced made leniency a legal impossibility. She sentenced Cray to 8 years, acknowledging his cooperation while declining to characterize it as courage. She said, a man who speaks the truth only after he has been cornered has done the minimum required of him. The court credits him for the minimum. Aldous Price, the county records clerk, resigned his position the week Colcord was arrested. He was not charged. He moved to Missouri. The man who replaced him went through the filing room with particular care over the following winter and found 11 documents that had been altered and 9 that had been destroyed and their replacement copies suppressed. He wrote a report and sent it to Denver, and Denver sent a team to resurvey the bench. The resurvey confirmed Cecilia's measurements to within 3 inches. She came back to Vane Creek Ranch in the fall of 1884. The cabin was the same except that someone she suspected Harkin's wife had organized it, had put new boards across the south gap, and someone else had repaired the stove with a new corner plate, and there was a cord of wood stacked under the eave of the porch that she had not left there. She opened the east window. The bench dropped away below, and the dry cimarron ran silver in the October light, and the sage smelled like itself, which was to say it smelled like the edge of the world. She opened the ledger to a clean page. She wrote October 14th, 1884, Vane Creek Ranch, first morning in residence. Bench in good condition, spring on east side to be assessed. Stove repaired. Wood cut. East window opens without binding. She paused. Callum Rede arrived yesterday on the buckskin horse. He has taken a room in Harlan's Ford. He tells me he is considering the question of permanent residence. I told him to consider it as long as he requires, and then to tell me plainly. I have told him this twice. I believe a third telling will not be necessary. She paused again, the pencil resting against the paper. He stayed for supper. He fixed the east gate. He is not a man who performs at gestures, which means he only makes them when he means them. I am noting it. She stopped writing. She looked out the east window at the Cimarron country and the wide country beyond it, and the sky which was the specific blue of October in the high territory, and which had no adequate description that she had yet found, though she would keep trying. No, she did not keep trying alone. Callum Rede told her plainly on a Thursday in November, which was the third Thursday of November, and which was cold enough that the first real frost had come in overnight, and the sage held ice at the base of its branches. He came to the east window of the cabin, which was open despite the cold, because she had not yet learned to keep it shut, and he stopped in the yard below it, with his hat in his three-fingered hand, and he said, "Cecelia, I am done considering." She set down the ledger. She leaned on the windowsill and looked down at him. He looked up at her, and the frost was in his beard, and his coat was the alkali dust color it had always been, and his eyes were the blue of the winter ice that ran under everything in him. And she thought of the entry she had written in October, and she thought, I will not have to write a third telling. Well, she said, I intend to stay, he said, in this county, on this bench. I have spoken to Harkin about the lease on his east pasture, and he is inclined to discuss it. I have looked at the spring on your east side, and I believe it can be brought in. And I would like, he said, pausing the way he always paused when he was choosing the exact right weight for what he was about to say, to continue having supper at this table. Among other things. She looked at him. Among other things, she said. Ma'am. She leaned a little further on the windowsill. The frost air came in past her shoulder, and she did not notice it. Mr. Rede, she said, I have documented every day of this situation in that ledger going back to March. I have been precise, and I have been patient, and I have been deliberate, and I have waited for certainty before writing anything down. She looked at him. I wrote you down in October. He was still. He was very good at being still. I know it, he said. Good, she said. Come have supper and we will discuss the spring and the east pasture and Harkin's lease and the other things. And she stepped back from the window and left it open, the cold coming in full and clean and full of sage, and went to put more wood in the repaired stove. He came in. He fixed the door behind him because the wind had found the gap in the bottom hinge and let a draft through when the temperature dropped, and he sat at the kitchen table in the lamplight, and Cecelia set 2 plates and 2 cups, and the ledger between them, open to a clean page, and the pencil beside it, and they ate supper in a silence that was not uncomfortable, and had not been uncomfortable since the first afternoon on the dry Cimarron bench. And after supper she wrote in the ledger, and he watched her write, and after a while he said, What are you writing? She said, What happened today? What we agreed to? What comes next? He looked at the page. He looked at her. She turned the ledger so he could read. She had written Thursday, November 20th, 1884. Cold. Frost on the sage. Callum Rede told me plainly that he intends to stay. We will discuss the East Spring and the Harkin lease and the other things. I believe the other things will be settled by spring. I am writing it down because I do not leave important things to memory, and this is the most important thing I have written in this ledger or in any other. He read it. He was quiet for a moment. The most important, he said. She looked at him. The most important, she said so far. The East Spring was brought in by April. The Harkin lease was settled in February. The other things were settled as she had written by spring by a particular Sunday morning in March in the cabin at Vane Creek, with the bench running green from the snowmelt and the dry Cimarron running fast and silver, and the east window open to a sky that had no adequate description. The wedding was small. Harkin's wife stood up. Whither Cassette rode down from Pueblo for it, and he was thinner and quieter than he had been, but there was something in his face that had not been there in October. Some lightness that was the specific lightness of a man who has been allowed to have his own name back. He shook Rede's hand, and he held Cecilia's hand for a moment, and he looked at her and he said, Mrs. Rede. And she said, Vane Rede, if it's the same. And he almost smiled and said, count everything. And she looked at him and said, always have. The Cimarron spur came through the dry Cimarron bench in the summer of 1886, running the original route that the 1882 survey had identified and the manipulation had tried to bury. Cecelia negotiated the right-of-way herself, sitting at the kitchen table in the cabin with Callum on her left and the ledger open and a pen in her hand that she had bought for the occasion at Harkin's dry goods store. The railroad men sent 3 representatives. They offered a figure. She wrote a different figure in the ledger and turned it to face them. One of the representatives said, "Mrs. Rede, this is significantly above Vane Rede," she said. And yes, it is. They paid it. She took a portion of the right-of-way payment and she sent it to 6 families who had been displaced from the bench between 1882 and 1884, the families whose land Colcord had acquired through forged instruments and coerced sales. She sent it with a letter, and the letter said, "This is not compensation for what was taken. Compensation for what was taken does not exist in a sufficient amount. This is acknowledgement that a record exists of what was done, and that the record has been kept, and that the keeping of it was the obligation of anyone who saw what happened and had a pencil in their hand. The record is in the federal courthouse in Denver. It will not be removed. My name is Cecelia Vane Rede, and I remain respectfully accountable to the facts." Callum Rede lived at Vane Creek Ranch for the rest of his life. He brought the East Spring into a proper line in 1886, and he built a second room under the cabin in 1887, and he ran cattle on the bench with a quiet competence that the valley came to rely on without fully understanding it. He did not draw his sidearm on the bench for the remainder of his days. He fixed things. He was very good at fixing things. Gates, hinges, fence lines, the particular wooden quality in a conversation that has gone the wrong direction and needs a quiet word to set it right. He died in the autumn of 1909 in his own bed, with Cecilia's hand in his, and his last words were, "The east window, don't let them keep it shut when I'm—" She didn't. She kept it open. She wrote it in the ledger that night. She wrote it in the same small, careful hand she had been writing in since 1880. She was 53 years old. She kept the ranch for 20 more years, and she kept the ledger for all of them. And by the time she died in the spring of 1929, the ledger that had started in a land office in Abilene had been followed by 31 others, and all of them were kept in the cedar chest in the corner of the East Room, and all of them were cross-referenced, and all of them were dated, and all of them were without exception accurate. Barnaby Cassett, who had gone back to his real name publicly in a newspaper article in the Denver Post in 1885, and who had spent the decade after the trial working for the Interior Department as a senior surveyor, came to the funeral. He was the one who spoke. He was not, by his own admission, a man who was good at speaking. But he said one thing that the people present remembered long after the occasion itself. He said, "She counted everything." That is the whole of it. She counted everything, and she wrote it down, and she did not let the counting stop when the counting became dangerous. The whole valley would have gone different if she had stopped. She did not stop. The east window was open during the service, because it always was, and the sage came in on the wind from the bench, and the dry Cimarron was running low in the early spring, the way it always ran, silver and unhurried, and entirely indifferent to the particular small courage of human beings who live beside it and write things down and do not stop. That is the story of Vane Creek Ranch. Not the story the railroad men told, the one about a right-of-way negotiation that had set a precedent in 3 territories. Not the story the Denver papers told, which was about a fraud trial and a federal conviction. The real story was in the ledger, the one in Cecelia Vane's small, careful hand. The story of a woman who arrived in a strange town with a dead husband's deed and a box of pencils, and the specific, non-negotiable conviction that facts correctly documented do not disappear. That the truth of a thing is not diminished by the power of the people who want it buried. That a count, if it is accurate and if it is kept, will outlast any man who would prefer it didn't exist. She had been right. The ledgers are in the Federal Archive in Denver. They have been there since 1885. They are not going anywhere.